Our next session is AI and software, a panel on what's real and what's next. We have four panelists who are going to share their insights, and I'm joined here by two of them. You remember them earlier from this week, Jeff and Marty. We're going to be joined also by Billy Hollis, who all of you hopefully remember from various conferences in the past. The idea for this whole session came from, I follow or connected with Billy on LinkedIn, and he has some real spicy takes on AI. And so reading those all the time, I said, gosh, how could we incorporate some of them spicy takes into the conference? And thus this session was born. Panel also includes Tyler Akidau, the CTO at Redpanda, who you guys saw earlier this week. Tyler's not able to join us live today, but he was generous enough to give us time for the panel. I'll keep my introductions brief, as the panelists will also be introduced in the presentation. So let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion, AI and Software, What's Real and What's Next. I'm Marty Lewis, Staff Software Engineer here at Synergex, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. I've been with Synergex since 2007, working on products like Workbench and Synergy DBL integration for Visual Studio. You may know me from past conferences presenting any number of product-related topics. In my current role, I'm working across teams to improve processes and drive innovations that help our customers modernize their systems. AI has become impossible to ignore, but for those building and maintaining business-critical software, the real question is where it delivers meaningful value and what it takes to implement it effectively. Today, we'll move past the buzzwords to discuss practical applications, modernization strategies, infrastructure requirements, and the trust, security, and governance considerations that come with adopting AI. Joining me today are Tyler Akidau. Tyler is CTO at Redpanda, leading the company's streaming and agentic AI initiatives. He's a veteran of Snowflake and Google, where he built foundational stream processing systems, and is the author of Streaming 101 and 102 series, as well as the O'Reilly book Streaming Systems. We're also joined by Billy Hollis. Billy has been developing software for over 40 years and is recognized worldwide for his expertise in architecture, development, and UI/UX design. He's built systems across industries, authored 10 books, spoken at major conferences like TechEd and VS Live, and worked directly with Synergex customers to improve usability and design. And finally, Jeff Greene. Jeff is CTO at Synergex, where he's led our technical strategy since 2006. He's introduced Synergy DBL integration for Visual Studio, created the open source Harmony Core project, and helped develop our streaming integration platform for real-time data access. His work focuses on helping customers modernize their systems while maximizing their existing technology investments. Each of our panelists brings a different perspective on where AI fits into modern software systems. Let's start with where you see AI having the most immediate practical impact today. So to Tyler on talent pipelines. Tyler, you oversee a large engineering org. How do you perceive the role of junior engineers shifting in the AI era? With claims from GitHub that GitHub Copilot users are completing tasks 55% faster, how do you see this shaping entry-level work?
For me, I think I see two aspects to that are interesting. I think the first one is, you know, in broad terms, I think this AI shift feels a lot like just all the advancements that have happened in the past. If you go back far enough, to be a successful software engineer, you had to essentially memorize the entire instruction set of the processor you were working on because you were coding everything in assembly. And then we moved to a world where we had compilers, and that became less and less necessary. And if you even go back 4 years ago, like I think most people building large applications would have no idea what the actual instruction set they're using looks like. In some sense, AI is leveling us up, one more step, and allowing us to focus at a higher level on these things. You can't just forget about them, and we're not to that point yet. But to me, I see it largely as that sort of progression. And so AI is going to enable junior engineers to do more than they used to, and that's awesome. But they're still going to need, they still need to kind of have the basics, the foundations in place to do it effectively. You see lots of, or at least I've seen lots of articles about kind of, you have these companies that have vibe coded everything, and they kind of get to a certain point, and then it's just this like toppling, Howl's Moving Castle, kind of House of Cards thing that like they just can't manage anymore. And so you have to be able to, until we get to the point that AI can just literally do everything from a software engineering perspective and create a pristine and beautiful large system, which I imagine will someday, but until you get there, you're kind of having to bridge that. And so that's kind of the role that I think software engineers are taking. I think the other piece that's interesting that I have really noticed firsthand is those more junior folks are also the folks who've been kind of, living in the digital world their entire lives, and they just have a different perspective on things. And so in a lot of cases, they're the ones that kind of have the right ideas about how to use this stuff effectively. And so I think they're also very valuable to the workforce from that perspective of like, they kind of bring this insight that those of us who've been doing this forever and are maybe a little more stuck in our ways might be a little slower to kind of see like, hey, this is how you can really utilize this to move forward. So I think there's a ton of value there. And I think it's really just kind of a shift more than a like, well, you're not necessary anymore.
Great insight. Jeff, what skills like prompting, oversight, or AI integration should engineers build to stay relevant?
I probably lean pretty heavy on sort of the oversight side of interacting with AI. I think, at least as the world stands right now, AI is really good at doing specific tasks, and it's not really good at having judgment about what tasks it should perform, what's a good actual outcome, when is it actually finished. So having that sort of higher level thought, so you're moving up a level and you're letting the AI take care of the basically like the AI is operating as the compiler and you're operating as the high level language user at this point. But you have to think in that higher level and provide the reasoning over top of it, because it's just this overly smart compiler. It doesn't know what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. And even if you ask it, right, like it's just going to tell you that it's a good idea, whether it is or not. So having that understanding of your problem domain and providing that good oversight, I think that's always going to be beneficial, no matter, well, mostly, no matter how smart AI gets, there's always going to be a reason for people to understand their domains and understand them well.
Great. So next topic is around modernizing legacy systems with AI in mind. To Jeff and Billy, a recent MIT study found that 95% of enterprise generative AI pilots show no measurable ROI after 6 months. For companies with DBL-based or other legacy systems, what pragmatic bridge strategies can help integrate AI successfully without chasing hype?
Well, I think we're in an era where we don't really know where that 95% failure comes from. I mean, you could be generous and say that we just don't know enough about how to use it yet, and we haven't seen some of the the best areas to get the most value from. Or you could be pessimistic about it and say maybe there aren't that many really solid use cases for AI at the enterprise level, because a lot of the AI success we've seen up to now has been much more at the individual level. Individuals adopt it to get more productivity, and so it's not clear to me exactly what mix of those has resulted in that 95% failure. We're going to have to invest some more time in it, but I think that there's obvious places where we ought to poke and try, and then some places where it's not sure that it'll work as well. I mean, I would not hesitate today for any development team to say, I need to develop some REST pipelines to get data from here to there. Helping automate that with AI and generating that kind of routine code out, that makes complete sense to me. But if I'm walking up to do advanced UI in XAML with C# behind it, well, the AI model probably doesn't have enough stuff on the internet to train on that, and I'm probably not going to get the kind of results out of that I would need. So I think some of that kind of failure is people are trying to do things that are outside that mainstream where AI is trained on and knows what to do, and now the oversight that we talked about earlier comes into play. When do you When do you try to go that route, and when do you just piecemeal it with little pieces and not try to have AI do too much overall, and lean back on your architects and your senior people to do that? That's an open question to me, and I think that as teams get more experience trying this and they have more failures, they will be able to strike that balance of using AI to automate where it adds a lot of value, and use more traditional techniques for places where it doesn't.
I think as kind of a follow-on to that, this idea that maybe, so the 95%, I'm gonna lean into optimism and for a moment and say that the 95% represents we don't know how to use it yet, rather than it doesn't have a use. And say like the best bridge strategy I can come up with here is there's the key ingredients that are almost certainly going to be necessary for anyone who's successful. Once people figure out how the heck to do it, and everyone becomes a fast follower that tags along and does whatever the pattern is, you're gonna need RESTful web services with APIs that are designed well, because poorly designed API surfaces confuse the heck out of AIs. You're gonna need accessibility and visibility into your data as it flows through the system. And you're gonna have to be able to test and repeat on these things, because AI is a random number generator at the end of the day. And so, being able to test the bounds of your random number generator are important. So I think while we don't know what people are exactly going to use these things for yet, no one's got those like killer I can apply this everywhere in enterprise space ideas yet. Having web services, having event-driven systems, having a data strategy of some kind, these all will pay off once people do figure out what you should be doing with those things. They're always going to be there.
I think maybe one bridge strategy that people should take into account they might not think about, especially if they're decision makers that don't do hands-on development. People on the team, especially more senior people, a lot of people get into this world to write good, clean code. They take a lot of pride in being able to do that. And the idea of sort of supervising the UI and analyzing where it's making mistakes and figuring out how to fix those mistakes, that's a different kind of work. And some of those developers are going to find that tedious and not necessarily to their taste. So as you go into trying to figure out how to bridge over to that world, being able to make sure that you don't lose some people, because that's going to be some of the best people you have that really take a lot of pride in being able to do things. Finding a way to fit them into the overall strategy for using AI is pretty important, because if you make them angry enough and you just throw a lot of tedious work at them that they don't want to do, well, there's still plenty of demand out there from people who need their talents, and so you probably lose them.
Would be a risk.
Yeah.
Moving on to infrastructure readiness for AI. Tyler, enterprises spend $13.8 billion on generative AI in 2024, a 6x jump from the year before, but many report no clear strategy. From your perspective, what infrastructure shifts like real-time data streaming or model retraining are necessary for AI to actually deliver value in production? How do event streaming and AI intersect?
I think my general take is, like, when we're talking about agentic AI in particular, like 80% of it, I think, is the right way to do it. Like 80% of it is basically a streaming problem. Like there's so much overlap. As Jeff was saying, like these agents are chaotic. They're in effect random number generators, and you need to build up a system that allows you to, manage and govern all of the inputs going into it, all of the calls that are being made to gather context, and all of the outputs. You want to record everything for auditing, so you can sort of analyze it after the fact, because you can't, it's an opaque box. You can't go in and kind of figure out like, why is it making this decision or not. It's a magic thing that does stuff when you feed it inputs. So you need to be able to record all that stuff. That's a streaming problem. You need to for real practical problems, these agents need access to a bunch of data. So you're basically need to connect a bunch of different sources together. And you're wanting to govern those accesses so they are, reading the right data, not writing the right data. You're sort of validating their responses and their actions. Again, this ends up, a very good way to do this is via streaming. Like if you're sort of interconnecting everything through streaming pipes, that interconnection becomes the right central place to kind of perform all this governance. So I think we will get to a world where we kind of build out this notion of what an agentic data plane looks like, and I think it's going to be about 80% of it's probably going to be streaming because it's just kind of the right paradigm for fitting these AI agents in. They're effectively actors, and they're sort of very capable and complex, but also untrusted and a bit chaotic actors.
With the AI agents kind of being untrusted, but need to have all the up-to-date information, what does it take to ensure that AI decisions are made with up-to-date and reliable data, especially in like business critical systems?
I think there's a couple pieces that are important. One is they need to have access to the data. So you need to either have they need to either be able to query the data fresh, or they need to be able to get kind of real-time updates via a stream of updates. But then not giving them access to the data isn't enough. You need to govern those accesses and make sure that you're only sort of poking holes in your private data just in the right or poking holes that give you access to the private data in the right spots, right? So that like an agent, a good example is like an agent that's supposed to work on behalf of an employee accessing the HR database. It shouldn't be able to access the entire HR database and sort of provide answers based off of what everybody's HR data looks like. That's just asking for trouble, right? And so you've got to make sure that that agent only has access to whatever data it needs. And then on the other side, on the output side, you need to be validating like it's going to give this response, or it's going to say let's go do action X. Like, is that sane? And that either is like you need to create a pre-canned list of like these are the things that it's allowed to do. Or in more complex cases, you may have sentinel agents. Like you may have multiple agents that kind of are there to look at the output and say, okay, if all three of these say it looks sane, we'll assume that it's sane. But like there's different strategies, but you've really got to mix the sort of freshness of data with guardrails and governance, and it's not an easy task.
I definitely have more questions on trust and governance, but I want to change topic real quick. For like UX and the human AI interface, Billy, you know better than most that UX often makes or breaks adoption. How should AI augment user experience in enterprise apps? Where does it make work easier, and where should we avoid over automation to maintain trust and control?
There's a lot we don't know yet, but based on my experience in trying to improve enterprise apps, keep in mind that most enterprise apps have their roots back in the 1990s, or in some cases earlier than that. And that carries with it certain tendencies for areas to not be as effective for the users as they should be. And two of those that AI could potentially have some significant impact on. One is search and just general information retrieval, which includes searching and querying and things like that. Most systems developed in the 90s on systems that didn't have a lot of raw horsepower. The search is let's put stuff in these individual fields, and it's very SQL friendly, not particularly user friendly. And they also didn't spend a lot of time figuring out exactly how to display the information to the user. So search actually slows users down in enterprise apps more consistently, I see it more often than any single factor. And AI has some obvious applications there. If you can get a lot of that information into a form where they can just query it. I mean, how many enterprise apps have yet to even move to a Google-style search bar? Basically, shifting to AI would be the opportunity to enter the modern world on search for those kinds of apps. Now, you're going to talk later about some of the security implications and such, and they're pretty big. But just the fact that somebody should be able to very quickly query, you might replace lots of reports, for example. because right now we write a bunch of reports, we put parameters. AI should make it possible for, at least in some areas of enterprise information retrieval, to just let the user tell you what they want and bring it back out. So I think that has some enormous opportunity to speed users up by giving them a dramatically new and modern UI. The other area where I see enterprise apps falling short is workflow. Pretty much every enterprise app has workflow in it. It's just that the workflow often isn't very structured. For example, sometimes work goes through the organization from app to app to app, and humans are bridging the apps with expertise that's in their head. That is the most common form of workflow in enterprise apps today. So while I think that AI has enormous potential to fix that kind of workflow and make it much better, some of the agentic stuff that Tyler's talking about and that he works in, I think there's enormous opportunity there. On the other hand, if that workflow only exists in human heads, you've got to go through a process of getting what that workflow is and the rules of how it works. You got to get that out of their heads into some kind of a tangible form for AI to be able to use to do it. And as somebody who's done that many times in many companies, that's hard because they have all that stuff up there, including a lot of edge cases, and you can interview them until the cows come home, and you'll never quite get all the things that are up there in their heads. So that when you start to try to automate workflow with any radically new technology, the risk to the organization, if you get it wrong, is high. And you have to very carefully monitor it, especially during some of the early implementations, to find all the holes that you got wrong. So I think AI has some enormous potential there to look. We've had situations where we automated workflow and cut unit labor by half for the main process that a company did. We're talking about 100 full-time equivalent people that were no longer necessary in that enterprise because of automated workflow. So that has enormous potential for returns, but I see that as fundamentally another tier of complexity higher than working with information retrieval with AI.
It sort of sounds like the act of analyzing your processes is a whole effort that you should be doing, and you're not going to make those improvements to workflow until you've done that anyway. But in the short term, empowering your existing users, making it easier for getting access to the data that they need is kind of the big leg up.
Yeah, that's a good summary.
Awesome. Okay. Jumping into trust, security, and governance for all of you, AI adoption is accelerating. 78% of organizations are now reporting using AI, up from 55% a year earlier, but much of it happens through shadow AI or, gradual natural adoption. How should enterprises balance those bottom-up productivity gains with top-down governance to ensure AI remains secure, reliable, and explainable?
I think, what I've been seeing at Redpanda is, I think we definitely see a lot of this, sort of bottom up, like engineers are just like, I'm going to use Claude Code because it makes my life so much easier, or I can do so much more. So there's a ton of that happening. I think what we've tried to do on that front is establish and work with legal and HR and others, and try and establish clear policies for, like, here's how we want to approach AI tools. Like we're very strongly encouraging people to adopt them, but we also, we don't want it to be the full Wild West, and like there's a bunch of scenarios where you don't want private company information being fed into these models when they're also going to be then training on those models for their own public consumption. So that's one part of it. I think the other part, which kind of is where the top down comes in, is I do think companies that want to lean in on AI more need to drive a conscious strategy of, here's how we're going to get there. And it needs to start with, like, what are you trying to achieve? Where do you see the value coming from? And that may be something that you can, you as someone in the C-suite or someone anywhere in the company says, well, I see this, this is the thing that needs to happen. These are the processes that we could improve, or just maybe a matter of, like, sort of asking wide throughout the company, like, help us understand where are places where you think having a digital worker, like an agent, could help you. Once you identify those use cases, then you can kind of figure out how to tackle this. Like, which ones are easy, which ones are hard, which ones are going to bring the most impact. It's not really that different than kind of prioritization and strategization for general product development or other business processes. The only difference is that you've got this AI agent involved, and you've got to figure out, well, how are we going to actually orchestrate that? But really, it's a lot. I think it's just, you've got to set that mindset of, we want to make this happen, and let's invest to make it happen, and let's learn what we need to do. And if you just sort of rest on your laurels and wait, you're probably going to get left behind, to be honest.
I think I'll jump in here with maybe some thoughts more in the direction of the shadow AI, and why do people end up doing shadow AI or shadow IT or whatever forms of shadow things we have going on here. A lot of times, at least from my perspective, that is the people at the top of the organization. They don't know how to do whatever this thing is. Like, they're not at the ground level. They don't have a in the trenches kind of understanding of whatever the problems are that are being solved at any given moment, because that's what happens often when you move up the chain. And so employees will go figure out how to do their jobs well. And the solutions they come up with can be suboptimal because they're working on them in just their little capsule of the world. But usually they're very creative, and they solve their capsule of the world worth the problem well. I think if you want to bring that out of the shadows, you can't, because under the assumption that the person at the top is still not going to have a perfect understanding of what the people at the bottom are doing, you can't have the top say, well, this is how we're going to solve your problem for you, because they don't know. But if you build some kind of information framework for them to work in and say, well, you guys have your sandbox over here, and you can do whatever you come up with. You're allowed to do it on this, hopefully 80% of the code base, the information space, whatever it is, some decently sized chunk of the company's data source, intellectual property that's not that dangerous, right? Like, there's different categories of if this got out, it would be the end of the world. If this got out, it would be mildly embarrassing. If this got out, who cares? We'll move on. The things that fall into that category, if you can let loose the employees on that third category, you can come up with actual innovative things and then be on the lookout for them. And then that's when you have that chance where top down can say, I see what people are doing when we gave them the option to be creative, and now we're going to try and productionize that and make it work for bigger than a little bubble of just this one person. But if you don't give individual workers that creativity and the room to experiment at the level of their job, I think we're going to get 95% failed enterprise AI initiatives.
I'll pipe in and sort of reinforce one of the points about executives not necessarily understanding, even as much as they think they do, about what's going on throughout the company. Because having worked through some of these kind of borderline business process reengineering things, there's a phase where you go through and you observe users, and in many cases record those interactions. And I've come to conclusions about that and talked about some of the changes that need to be made. In one case, a very high executive heard the changes that I talked about and why I thought they were needed. And he said, that's not the way our people work at all. That's not the way the system was designed, and people don't do it that way. I got the recording. You can watch him doing that way. And he was legitimately surprised by the fact that people downstream are not doing it the way that he thought they were. And so, yeah, the decisions that come from the top about all of the application of AI to change people's fundamental jobs is going to be flawed if these people don't have a better understanding. And one of the things that sometimes is very helpful there is if you're going to go through that investigation phase, get somebody from the outside who specializes in facilitation and things like that to come in and help you work through it, because they have no axe to grind about anything that's going on in the company. And so that way you won't get into some of the tug of war between higher ups and people further down. I think if somebody really wants to be successful in some of the changes that are as radical as AI requires, the understanding phase that comes in first can be really facilitated by having somebody come in that will help them work through it.
Great insights. Thinking about trust and security from a different perspective, how do you build trust and safeguards around the decisions that your AIs make?
I think again, you really, this is where kind of having the type of framework that Jeff alluded to earlier that allows you to run a bunch of testing and set up your guardrails and do validation can really help. I mean, but again, it needs to be a multi-layer defense sort of a thing. Like you need to be able to replay known data through your agents and see like what are they doing? Are they doing what we want? You need to have systems in place that are kind of validating real time for things that aren't being tested, and then you need to have that auditability so you can go back and when things don't quite work out the way you thought that they would or thought that they should, you can go back and figure that out. I think you kind of need all those things, and I suspect that over the next few years we're going to kind of figure out which approaches work really well and which things are sort of easily replicatable and things like that. And this will probably be easier 2 to 3 years down the road, but for now it does really feel very Wild West. That's my take.
Tyler, I'd have a question. I'd like to extend that just a little bit. When you talk about the auditability, I presume that you also include that just you're going to have standards checkpoints at which you're going to do some auditing, whether you've really found anything wrong or not, that you would want to investigate a little bit. How do you kind of balance that against the intrusiveness of that in people? Do you feel like that's it's worth it to sort of be deep diving audits to discover potential problems, or is it more, as you talked about in your answer, more waiting for things to go wrong and then trying to figure out what went wrong?
I think for me on the auditability side, I mostly would want to apply that to specific cases where we know AI is being used. Like if we're talking about kind of the place where people are going off and doing shadow AI, they're using AI that we don't know about. That's a harder problem to kind of apply auditability to. I do think it's an interesting question, because that's, on the one hand, it's like you said, it's kind of, it feels invasion of privacy sort of in that realm. On the other hand, if you have an established policy, like here's the AI tools that are available, and if you want to use things outside of this, you need to go through official channels. If they're not doing that, that's outside company policy. That's not what you want your employees doing either. And so it's a hard balance. But I think the auditability, I think, is really, really important just in the context of agents themselves and being able to kind of understand what those AI agents are doing and how they behave over time.
This chunk of conversation is pointed me in the direction. So like in security, software and IT security, we have the security onion where you have your different layers. And I think the onion analogy works really well for AI safety here as well. You're saying like, this is the AI safety onion. That at the outer shell of it, whatever you have, basic model training, and you're doing the basic guardrails in the prompts that you allow to get processed and stuff like that. And then as you move towards the center of the onion, you do still have to deal with the data that you're feeding into the model, the people who are using it, and all of the point of the security onion is that no layer of the onion is complete, and no perfect shell exists that keeps everything safe all the time. And if we go into it with the mindset that we can achieve perfect safety 100% of the time, nothing will ever get made anywhere. But if we go into it with the thought of we need to build as many layers of safety here as we conceivably can, and as we learn more, we build more layers, that feels productive and possible at the same time.
Right. Moving on to maybe the future, what's coming next to all of you. What AI related trends should companies like ours pay close attention to over the next 12 to 18 months? What are you personally excited or concerned about?
I'll jump in. I have the absolute most basicest take on this, I think, which is as a software engineer, I am seeing a lot of change in the specifically software engineer AI space, Claude Code, ChatGPT's, OpenAI's Codex. These are moving forward at a pretty decent rate in terms of like they seem to have gotten at least over the hump of usability, right? Like in the last 6 months or so, I would say they've gone from, oh, that's neat, to I can actually do something useful with this. Um, I'm not sure that they're accelerating at the rate that they were 6 months ago in order to get to the point that they got to. I think that there are incremental improvements, but who knows? Maybe we hit some threshold at some point, and um, a bunch of use cases get unlocked again, and all of a sudden you can do vastly more tasks that you absolutely had to really, really watch the AI closely before, and you'll get into semi-autonomous kinds of behaviors. So that's what I guess I'm um, excited, nervous, concerned about, some mix of the three.
And I'd say my answer is relatively similar. I'm maybe leaning more optimistic, even. I've historically been a bit of an AI skeptic, and I still think, like, I think Jeff's assessment of where the technology is, and where it's going to go, and what it's going to take to get there. I think that I agree with that. Like, at the same time, I also think it has reached a threshold where, like, there's actually so much we could do with this now, and we just really haven't figured out how to do that effectively in the enterprise. And so I think there's kind of a huge opportunity now. Plus, there's going to be this convergence of, like, the models are going to get better. Like, all the tech is going to get better. How fast? Who knows? I agree. It's not going to go as fast as they say it is. Like, they're always like, it's going to be AGI in a month. And, like, what was the Anthropic one of, like, all code's going to be written by AI, like, by, like, what, 2 months ago or something was the prediction. I don't know. Like, we clearly passed that. Like, those aren't going to happen. But still, there is this, like, sort of convergence of, like, as we learn how to use it more and it gets better and better, like, we're really headed towards, I think, a very exciting place. So I think it's a fun time to kind of be trying to be on that forefront, and because whoever figures out how to do it effectively is going to really reap a lot of benefits.
If I were looking at trends and what I expect to happen, I'd probably want to emphasize an area that developers don't think about too much because they don't do as much of this, and that's AI generated media, because that's another area that is absolutely proceeding, improving, doing new things at a pretty astounding rate. I go in every few months when I need to generate something, and I'm just amazed. After 3 or 4 months, it's always significantly better than it was 3 or 4 months ago. So what's the problem there? Well, no big problem, but there are a couple of cautions to look at. There's a term that's used in various places in the industry called AI slop, where I think that kind of encapsulates the idea that people kind of get tired of stuff. AI tends to genericize everything, if that's a word. It tends to make it all kind of like the last thing that you saw, and you want to avoid that. There's also some tendency when something new and cool comes out, is that there's a tendency for people want to use it just because it's cool. And I saw this 15 years ago when we finally got UI technologies that would allow animation in the UI. Animation got overused and applied in awful, awful places that nobody really wanted. And so I think there is the potential for some of that same overreach to come about with people using AI generated media.
What will AI's equivalent of the skeuomorphic page drag animation look like?
Okay, I have a couple of extra questions I'd like to ask. When smartphones and apps took off, they raised the bar for UI and UX across software. AI is creating a similar shift. Users now expect higher quality, more seamless software experiences. How is this new wave of heightened expectations going to affect vendors, and what are the consequences if they fail to rise to meet them?
So I think that rightly or wrongly, the users they're just gonna expect everything that you do to just be much smarter. And every time they run into a little edge case where you're like, the software should have been able to figure out that's what I wanted from it, they're gonna increasingly be trained to wholesale reject your software for these little kind of nits. Um, that admittedly those nits often ruin people's day. Um, but I think the consequences of this are that as AI gets better at writing software, and even as we are right now, um, there's this idea that uh, if you piss off a user who is technically competent and really knows their business domain, in particular in sort of like vertical market type software, and depending on the kind of enterprise you are, they'll just replace you out of spite. You have pissed them off, and AI has given them the tools necessary to at least replace 75% of you, which is probably their whole use case for your software. And I think that's a place we haven't been in the software industry since like the 80s. Back in 1980, you could have one guy and you lock him in a room for a year and he pops back out and he's written your entire application, right? Because the scope of software was so much smaller back then. It was possible for a domain expert to do that. And team sizes exploded since then, and complexity requirements have exploded since then. And I think AI may bring back spite software, where you've pissed them off and they're just going to replace you.
I compare this to 15 years ago when modern apps first began to be a major thing in even routine enterprise software. The dynamic that I saw then, I expect to be repeated. And that dynamic is that the vast majority of teams do not have the experience, mentality, temperament, etc., to innovate in this space. They copy. They wait until they see something that's close enough to what they want that obviously works because it was a success, and then they copy that. My team wrote an app in 2008 in WPF that was copied by 3,000 companies for their first WPF app. And the unfortunate thing about that is some of them, the design was a terrible fit. So you have to be careful when you get into interaction. Interaction is a fundamentally different thing than processing. And to apply AI to interaction means that you've got to understand what's going on inside the user's head at a level that most people, to be bluntly honest about it, most people in the IT industry don't get. They don't have that much understanding and empathy with users. So what I'm expecting to see is there will be some people that will use this and will create some seamless, gorgeous systems that people just love to use and will be big successes. And then the rest will trail along and start copying those because they don't really have the assets in place to create those innovations as the leader, as the first people to roll them out.
Right. And Tyler, final quick question to you. History shows that after every big tech wave, there's a hangover. We saw it after the dot-com bubble and after early cloud adoption. Do you think we're in a bubble? How should enterprises set expectations for AI over the next 3 to 5 years?
I 100% think we are. I mean, I don't see any way that we're not. Like, it's just insane. So I think the right thing to do is measure your steps carefully. This, plan ahead, and try to really stick with things that bring clear value and are actually delivering useful things. Don't just throw a bunch of money at AI for the sake of throwing money at AI. Invest in things that actually deliver impact for your business. And if you do that, you should be fine. But if you're just sort of trying to ride the hype and throw money left and right because you got budgets for it, you're probably going to end up finding that you wasted a bunch of your money.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like common sense to invest in things that actually have impact for your business, but especially when it comes to new technology and the AI space, sounds like really sound reasoning. Okay.
Uncommon common sense.
I can give a guideline. If somebody in a meeting says, "Wouldn't it be cool if?" then you should suspect that it probably is not a good idea.
All right. That is all the time that we have for today. Thank you to all of our panelists, Jeff, Billy, Tyler, for sharing your experience and insights today. And thanks to all of you for joining us and contributing to the discussion. If there's one takeaway from this conversation, it's that AI in software isn't about chasing the latest trend. It's about understanding the real capabilities, identifying where they align with your business needs, and building the right foundation to support them. I encourage you to keep the conversation going, whether that's here at the conference, in follow-up meetings, or back at your organizations, as you consider how AI can add value to your systems and processes. On behalf of Synergex, thank you again for being here.
All right. And I believe there you are, Billy. Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. I in the intro I was saying how you inspired this whole panel through your spicy LinkedIn post. So I encourage everyone here, go find Billy on LinkedIn. He's got great content and a good guy to follow. So if anybody has any questions they want to ask, put it in the chat. But I've got one that I'm going to ask. It's, what is the one thing you hope we're not still talking about at next year's AI panel?
I want to hear Billy's answer.
Yeah, I think
with
we're all
mine.
here for you, Billy.
Well, we didn't talk about it much, but the most overhyped thing that I hear in just the general discussion, and it started to calm down some, but the idea that we're just right on the cusp of human equivalent intelligence, AGI. I think that is horribly overhyped. In fact, I do not believe that LLMs as they exist today, generative AI as it exists, is going to be the root of AGI. I think it may be a part, but I think we're looking at some serious breakthroughs that are needed before we get to that. So every time I hear somebody talking about human equivalent intelligence coming from AI, I always look, what are you selling? Because I don't think we're anywhere near that.
Just a few billion more, just a few 100 billion more, and we'll get there with LLMs. It's going to work just fine.
Just need another $1 trillion invested.
Yeah.
More data centers too, obviously.
I'd probably echo that. I hope that a year from now we're not still talking about replacing programmers with AI, replacing business analysts with AI. I hope the conversation broadly shifts to augment-based conversation where people talk about how is this going to help programmers do programmer things? How is this going to help business analysts do business analyst things? As opposed to, yeah, we're going to need a lot less programmers and business analysts. People's expectations are going to go up. And so you're going to need the same number of programmers and the same number of business analysts, and you're going to need to deliver a better product. That's the way this is going to go as far as I can see. And I'm just waiting for the rest of the world to figure that out too.
I really like to see where everyone is going with agentic AI and the capabilities that they're building. I love that we have things like MCP to let you extend products and enhance that whole situation. But I would love for there to be security built into any of this. I love the adage that the S in MCP stands for secure. It's too true. We just don't have any kind of controls on this, and I'd love to see that already be solved by the next year's panel.